They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but the difficult part is figuring out how to capture that perfect shot with a digital camera. In this instructional video, I will assist you on how to set up your Canon Rebel T7i camera. Whether you're an aspiring photographer or just getting started, we'll walk you through the essential settings, buttons, and features that will allow you to take beautiful photos. Let's dive in. Let's start by getting familiar with your Canon Rebel T7i's layout. In front of you, you have a compact DSLR packed with impressive features. Let's take a look at the key buttons and dials. The first switch we would want to locate is your power switch. Located on the top right of your camera, you'll notice that there's 3 options you can pick. First one will turn it on for photography mode, and your second one there turns it on for video mode. Next, you will take a look at the mode dial, which is located right next to it. It's your gateway for different shooting options. Turn it and try each option to figure out which one you like best. Some will have a little more creative control, like manual mode, but then they have a lot of different automatic options that can make it a little easier for snapping quick photos. After that is your shutter button, which is this button located right on the front of your camera. This will take all your pictures and videos. Be sure to press it halfway, which gives you a chance to focus in on your subject before you take the photograph. And then take a look. Once you turn your camera on, you'll notice the LCD screen come up. You'll notice that in this mode, this is where you use the viewfinder, and you'll look through, and you'll be able to see what your camera sees through that and be able to take your picture. But if you chose to look through the screen, you can press this button located on the top right, and that'll switch your camera around to then look through your LCD screen and kind of touch and change some of the settings that way rather than looking through your viewfinder. Next, I'll show you the menu button that you can go to on your camera. It's located right here on the top left. Go ahead and click that, and it just goes through your normal menu screens for your camera. The most important ones would definitely be your ISO speed and ISO automatic, but a lot of this stuff can just be changed for personal preference, really. White balance is another important one. We'll get to that a little bit later when we talk a little more about exposure, but yeah, that's your menu for your camera. Now that we're familiar with the camera's layout, let's discuss exposure. Exposure is key to achieving a beautiful image, and it's influenced by 3 factors: aperture, shutter, and ISO. Your aperture is considered your f-stop, and that controls the amount of light entering the lens. A wide aperture, which would be a small number, for example, the camera currently is set to 4. That right now is the lowest aperture that I can go for this lens. But as you go to turn that number up, your camera is going to allow less and less light through your camera. So that'll be another one of your things that you do to adjust your exposure. Right next to it here is your shutter speed. This becomes a deal with motion. So you'll create a lot of motion blur if you have a really slow shutter speed, like if it's 1/30th or even as low as 1/10 of a second. You'll notice it'll get brighter the lower your shutter speed is. So increase your shutter speed, and it kind of darkens your exposure a little bit. The biggest thing is your higher shutter speed is going to freeze your motion, which is a big deal for sports or wildlife shots where things are moving very quick and you want to be able to capture that without a lot of that blur going on. So then we have ISO, which is the final part of your exposure. Go to this bottom right button here. This honestly makes the biggest amount of difference in how much light is shown on your image. So definitely be sure to set this one first before you go and mess with some of the other ones. But you got to be careful. The higher you go on your ISO, you create grain, which will create kind of noise on your image, and sometimes you don't necessarily want that. So for perfect exposure, make sure to balance these 3 settings depending on your shooting conditions. Don't be afraid to experiment. Remember, practice is key when it comes to photography. Now let's talk about focus. To capture a sharp image, your camera needs to focus properly on your subject. For the most creative freedom, manual focus allows for full control of the focus, utilizing the focus ring located on the lens itself. So you can see here, you turn this, and your focus will get clearer and sharper, and that is just what's going to make your image stand out. But the Canon Rebel T7i, also has an autofocus system, which is very reliable, and it's a little bit easier to go through without having to sit there and spend a lot of time focusing out your subject. There's 3 different modes that it uses. It uses a one-shot autofocus, and this is great for still subjects, You have pressed the shutter button to focus, and once the camera locks, you're ready to take the shot. There's also the AI servo autofocus, which is continuous, ideal for moving subjects such as sports or wildlife. The camera continuously adjusts focus as the subject moves, so you can keep them sharp throughout the shot. And then the third mode is the AI focus autofocus, which sounds confusing, but this mode automatically switches between one shot and servo depending on whether your subject is still or moving. It's a versatile option if you're not quite sure how to go about focusing in on your subject. Also, remember to choose the right focus point. You can adjust it using the directional pad located on your camera. You'll see this box kind of move around as you adjust your directional pad. That is your main focus point of your image. Be sure to put your subject in there and try to make it as clear as possible. The next big thing when it comes to being able to take a beautiful image is you have to take into account angles and composition. Angles and compositions play a huge role, and here's a few tips as to how to take photos that can stand out. Your first rule is the rule of thirds. Imagine a 3x3 grid over your scene. Position the key elements of your shot along those lines, almost looking like a tic-tac-toe board. And it creates a more balanced, engaging compositions when you can put your subjects at the intersections of these lines, and not even just your subjects, but maybe focus points on your subject if it's a close-up image or something like that. Another example of an important angle or an important part of composition is your leading lines. Use natural lines in your environment depending on what kind of shot you're taking and where you're at. Use those to your advantage. There's roads that can create parallel lines for you. Buildings are another good one too if you have some tall buildings near you. And rivers are a good one that can really change it up a little bit with different curves and bends and stuff like that. This will lead your viewer's eye towards the subject, which adds a lot of depth to your shot. And the last thing I'm going to bring up is perspective. Don't be afraid to experiment with different angles. Try shooting from a low angle for dramatic effect, or shoot from above for a more unique perspective. Once you've captured your shots, it's important to power down your camera and store it properly to ensure it lasts. Let me go ahead and show you how that is done. First things first, once you're finished taking your image, go ahead and pop your camera from your on option to off. You'll see that the sensor will clean, which is always going to happen after your camera turns off. It's just good to keep the lens long lasting. I always like to take my screen, flip it out, flip it this way, and close it. Then she's ready to go, and be sure to always use your lens cap. And Canons always come with these lens caps that always fit perfectly. Pop that on there. It's good to go. Bust out your Canon bag here. Plop them right in there. And you're ready to go. Congratulations, you now have the basics down to confidently set up your Canon Rebel T7i and capture really stunning images. With a little practice, you'll be able to take photos that look like they belong in the professional world. Remember, the most important part is to keep experimenting and learning. Photography is an art, and you're the creator. Happy shooting.